wanted to talk to you about something here at the top of the show because I've really gotten into the collecting bug, and specifically collecting things for what I intend to be future research purposes, future projects I want to do. And a lot of old programs and a lot of magazine collections, a lot of different things. And I was talking recently with wrestling historian John Boucher about just the storage of things. Like, I'll give you an example, the Kaiser magazines. If you collected the Kaiser magazines, how do you store them? They originally are newspapers, and then they're magazines, but they're not full-size magazines, and then they're full-size magazines, and then the numbering's all over the place because they merged with Ring Wrestling and Wrestling Review. So I'm curious your thoughts, because you are obviously the most prominent person with a wrestling library at their own place. Actually, with any wrestling library, period, now that I think about it, outside of Notre Dame. So how do you address things like that in terms of collecting and storing things in a way that fits the meticulous mind of a collector?
I sit here and hope and pray and long for the day when I'll actually have time to go through everything, bag it, board it, and properly label it. That's how I store it. There's shit. I've got, I get stuff every time I go to a wrestling fan fest or whatever, or every time, I accumulate shit through the year, and the vault is not big enough. Most of my magazine collection is in order in terms of the title and chronological order from start to finish, and on my shelves in the vault. A lot of the magazines, but not maybe half, are bagged. I haven't even got that done yet, bagged and boarded. I've got programs sorted out by territories and hopefully somewhat chronologically, but then I pull stuff out to do B-roll, to illustrate whatever project I'm working on. And sometimes that doesn't get refiled right. And then I got new stuff on top of that. So one of these days when I have time, I'm going to bag, board, seal, label, organize, and catalog everything. But, yeah.
Let me give you a situation, ask you how you'd handle it. I have a pretty good sized collection of San Antonio programs. I love these things. And if anyone out there has them and you're looking to get rid of them, get in touch with the great Brian Last, and I'll say hey. But I love these.
And I'll say hey.
The Wrestler, they're all different sizes. I got them from the early 50s on into the late 70s when they stopped producing these. They're really, really great. So I have them, and even though they're in different sizes, I try to take those sizes and order them in chronological order. So in the midst of all that, an offer came my way to get a collection from someone who really didn't seem like a wrestling fan. It was a photo album. I guess photo album is not even the right word, just an album with sleeves. And in each sleeve were a few copies of each program. And I think it was 86 San Antonio programs.
Good Lord.
From 72 to 79 for $90. So I bought it. I said, I absolutely am buying it. I'm going through it. There's a lot of stuff I needed. But then I'm thinking, do I take them out of this album they've clearly been in since the guy got them in the 70s?
It's like some kids, the page protectors that you used to use in school back. Yeah, I've seen a bunch of that. Yeah.
What do you do? Like, I have a couple.
Well, I mean, it depends on how anal you want to get about this, because there's Bags Unlimited. You know about Bags Unlimited.
I don't know about.
You don't know about Bags Unlimited?
Is this a new sponsor that I haven't been alerted to?
Well, apparently it is now. You need to work on that. No, bagsunlimited.com. They have collector's bag. Anything from newspapers, old newspapers, the big full-sized ones like they used to have when people read things, all the way down to they have for trading cards and things. They have bags for TV guides, backing boards of different sizes and etc. for posters and things. So you can seal everything up. It just depends. But now you're going to fucking pay probably more than you paid for the shit to bag it and board it.
Are there any items that you don't bag for whatever reason? Are there any programs or magazines?
Yes, because I like it. I haven't barely even got to bagging programs yet, because I bagged and boarded 11,000 comic books over a 2-year period a while back. It's time consuming and laborious. And
well, why did you prioritize the magazines over the programs? See, I would have gone the other way.
Because it was just easier.
Do you know much about the early days? Like, in the early 50s, obviously, at the same period of time, the Weeders put out wrestling in, 51, I guess?
Yes.
And then the NWA Official Wrestling magazine, which is just some of the coolest covers of any magazines out there, those start coming out. By the way, I collect those too, anyone listening. But
for God's sake, you
before
shameless.
that, were there any national wrestling publications? How long did those magazines last before the next wave of magazines?
The ones you mentioned, that both their first issues, which I possess, were in 1951, and that's when the network TV had gotten going, and they figured, okay, basically the national magazines came back when New York wrestling came back, because all the publishers were located in New York. So even though TV had been hot since 48, 49, it wasn't in New York. Remember, Gorgeous George flopped, etc. But at that point, they only lasted a couple of years, if that. You said they ran for a while, and you see the same examples of them over and over. But that was the the extent of their run. And then for a lot of the mid-50s, it was Wrestling Life out of Chicago, or Wrestling As You Like It, whichever incarnation. And
those are the best. Those are so amazing.
Those are very cool, and a lot of legitimate information, even though they don't expose the business, but they give you business information and promoter shit and everything.
And even that, like, if you're just like a nerd for this stuff, it's like the first time Jim Barnett flies to Minnesota to meet Vern Gagne. It's like his little journal, or like, I met Vern at the airport, and then he took me home to meet his family. It's all in there.
But to answer your question, though, specifically, before those, in the 40s, there were really no national wrestling magazines, but there were in the 30s, Arena. And, there's a couple of different examples of magazines in the 30s, usually with Londos or Lewis on the cover, and they covered boxing and wrestling, but the wrestlers were on the cover and the boxers were in the background. But then later on, it was flipped in the 50s. Mid to late 50s, most of the magazines were boxing and wrestling. And boxing had the guy on the cover.
Always.
And then finally Wrestling Review broke that trend in 59 and started the wrestling-only magazines of the 60s, and they became, much more popular than the boxing magazines. They're more numerous. But yeah, you can go back to the 20s and 30s. Especially, I found a number of the magazine is called Arena, and it had a red logo.
Yeah.
Late 20s, early 30s. That was primarily wrestling, but boxing and wrestling in those days were treated much the same in the sports pages and the magazines.
One of the other things I love about collecting this stuff is you find things that, for a very good reason, are never talked about anymore, like various title histories that just popped up in programs or magazines in different territories that have no semblance of reality. I'm going to read you one real quick. This is from Wrestling Wranglers, 1960, first edition. This is one of the Joe Daly publications, if anyone out there knows that. He was a guy, I'm trying to find out more information about him. He put out of Long Island, New York, all these different publications that I guess they were selling at the local shows in the New York area. So here's the title history listed here. It has it by year, so it doesn't have like, Jim Cornette beat this person. It has, 1937, Jim Cornette won the title, and then it'll list who had it for each year. So, for example, 1947, Whipper Billy Watson, Lou Thez, Bill Longson. 1948 until 1954, Lou Thez. 1955, Leo Nomellini dethroned Lou Thez. 1956, Edouard Carpentier took the title from Nomellini.
What?
1957, Dick Hutton beat Carpentier.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
And then it says 1958, Dick Hutton, 1959, Pat O'Connor. So, a completely out of nowhere. I mean, we all know about the disputed Carpentier claim, but that isn't this. This is a completely different thing.
Well, yeah, at first, with Nomellini, he had it for a minute, technically, but no, he didn't keep it for like a year or whatever. And the next match never even happened.
Yeah, I have another one, Chic program from Detroit. It's great because it lists like every NWA title change of the 60s, and in order, it says like World Champion, history of the World Championship, and it says Lou Thez defeats Buddy Rogers. Gene Kiniski defeats Lou Thez. Bruno Sammartino. Just all of a sudden, they just declare new champion. Oh
no! You know what? For a brief period of time, that was in the 60s, right?
Yeah, it would have been probably late 60s. Yeah,
a brief period of time. They had Bruno coming in to Detroit, so there you go.
Boy, everyone tried out Bruno.
It's convenient.
Everyone really tried out Bruno. I mean, even he came into Memphis too, didn't he?
Well, once I think he was in Memphis and Nashville as WWF champion, and he brought Luke Graham to defend against. And I don't know why that if Nick and Roy at that point that were so wrapped up in the NWA did that, except if it was some kind of deal that they were doing with Vince Sr. or something. It was just odd. But once in '67, I think, and never again. But in this case, I always heard a story that, I guess now with all the fucking research that everybody's done, and I guess I should ask old Supermouth Dave Drayson. But in addition to the Funks being there when the box office was robbed, I always heard that Sheik brought Bruno in and gave him a couple of wins and built him up for a match with the Sheik. And they said, we'll go 2 out of 3. And Sheik took the first fall and Bruno's still waiting on the second one. I don't know if that's true or not, but then, that may be why Bruno didn't stick around. I don't know.
Was there any wrestler promoter, let me clarify, I guess, that pulled as much shit as the Sheik at the end? Like the last 5 years of the Sheik in the NWA, yeah. He just didn't give a fuck. I'm going to rip people off. I'm going to take the money. Allegedly, we just throw
allegedly. Wait, what are you getting me in this for? I get enough trouble on my own show. Thank you.
That's true. The last time
Captain Ed George might want to blade me.
That's the last time you said something about the Sheik. You talked about how ridiculous you thought it was that Captain Ed George claimed that the Sheik never bladed, and then Captain Ed George, I think, had some things to say about you that weren't very kind. And that's the first time we had heard of Captain Ed George since the box office snafu.
Since 1978.
1978.